Okay, now we are also recording the meeting. Okay, so it's a great pleasure for us to welcoming Serdar Degirmencioglu, who has been professor of psychology at Doğuş University in Istanbul, and he will, of course, talk about that experience at Doğuş University and what has been the post Doğuş, let's say, life for him. What we can anticipate it is, of course, that Serdar he's one of the academics who has signed a petition in 2015, Academic for Peace, who is also part of this association, let's call it, Academic for Peace, which has been established in 2012. And he will for sure also talk more about Academic for Peace as well. And I would also like to say that this event is co-organized by the Department of Culture, Politics and Society Department in cooperation with the Association Taksim, Arci Torino, Academic for Peace, Associazione Sardi, Unione Culturale Franco Antonicelli e il Museo diffuso della Resistenza, Turin Museo diffuso della Resistenza. What else? I would also, of course, welcome Murat Cinar, who is a journalist based in Torino. Yes, you can also see Murat in this moment. And another important issue is that also I would like to thank the network Scholars at Risk, and in particular Irene Bono, although she is not here, but she's also part of this network for the University of Torino, which is also very important, and also perhaps also Serdar can or will mention Scholars at Risk. So this is an online event, of course. You can follow now online, and we are recording, but I will also mention that this evening there will be a second part of this event at the Unione Culturale in Torino at 8:45 p.m. So also this is the second part of the meeting. Well, I think now we can start, and I will immediately give the floor to Serdar. In order to do that, I would like to briefly ask you to somehow try to start from the not necessarily from the beginning, let's call it, but to tell us about also the beginning of the establishment of the Academic for Peace in 2012. I ask you that because generally with Murat we were invited also in many events and this kind of conferences or seminars talking about the post-2015 Turkey and discussing the authoritarian turn, democratic backsliding, and we specifically are generally starting this narration, let's say this historical perspective also starting from 2015. So I would like to ask you to tell us about why actually in 2012 there was already this establishment of Academic for Peace, and also, I mean, how and what this informs us about also the evolution of democratic freedoms and rights in Turkey, starting a bit more earlier, because we generally, especially, you know, when we heard also about this recent development, we heard about that it was a kind of golden age before, and then immediately there was a fall off, an exit from democracy of Turkey. So in order to include and discuss later on the dramatic changes that occurred, I would like to ask you to briefly introduce what was before, let's say, and how also these institutions and associations started. Thank you, Serdar, again. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Buongiorno, everyone. It's a very wet day. It's raining, and it is a little difficult to be doing this online because I'm still not very used to speaking online to audiences that I do not see. Yesterday I gave a speech for a larger, I think, group, but my main concern was that my connection would fail. But here, the technology is far better, so I don't have to be concerned about that. But let me thank again for the organizers and for the entire thing. I don't know how much work you have done for this, but I do appreciate it. And getting back to the question, the new century, the 21st century, started in Turkey with a new party which gained the governing seat in about 6 months' time, which, if you are a political scientist, would be shocking, but that's how it worked. And of course, it had to do with how the electoral system worked. If you are able to gain more than 1/3 of the vote, you can capture the majority in the parliament. But at the same time, this indicates that there was a vacuum in Turkey, a political vacuum that could allow a populist and at the same time Islamist party to gain votes in a very small time frame. And after 2002, there were hopes that this new party would be a liberal party, and it would be the shining example of the so-called Islamic world, and it would be a very fresh perspective, a very fresh political opening for Turkey, which had been under a regime that favored militarism, that favored top-down governance. But what's particularly interesting is because I study policing, this new government pushed a law through the parliament and changed the regulations for policing in Turkey in 2007. Now, this is generally called the golden age of AKP, Justice and Development Party. If this is the golden age, why should this party be pushing changes in the policing, changing the law, and introducing, for instance, more police on the streets, introducing more intrusive policing so that the police can intrude the communities, number one, and can actually penetrate schools easily. So depending on how you looked at it, this was a golden age or not such a golden age. But perhaps some of you are familiar with authors and scholars from Europe who kept on repeating the golden age phrase. Some of them wrote in outlets such as Zaman. So they were pushing the idea that Turkey was on the right path. But what followed was not the right path, but more and more a hegemonic type of approach where everything was tied to a regime that was controlled in a very top-down fashion, and particularly by a single man. And then they tried a couple of so-called openings. For instance, there was an opening that was called the Alevi opening, to include those who were not necessarily considered Muslim in Turkey in the political game, and it turned out to be a very false start, and it fell down. But I want you to understand that this was a very sizable campaign. they started a university as part of this campaign. Most people don't know this. They started a university in Taksim, and they named it Tunceli University. And this was part of the effort to gain votes from the Alawi minority or the Alawite minority. I mean, if you look at it, of course, retrospectively from now, it is very clear that all of this was a political game. And this new university, for instance, very quickly organized the very first symposium that carried the name Taksim. Taksim in Turkey, as far as the official discourse was concerned, was a no-no. It was not a word that you can use, the original name for this region in eastern Turkey. But they wanted to start a university, hold a symposium where the governor of the region says, forget the time the state looked at you from above and in an exclusionary manner, let's start feeling the unity. Let's be together, etc. I mean, it's of course double speak, so to speak, but it was really an effort that included this much. But it quickly fell through because most of the people who were Alawites, they come from a leftist tradition enough to see through. And this was also followed by another opening that was often called the Kurdish opening, which explored the possibility of a peaceful transition to end the so-called conflict in Turkey with the Kurdish movement. And this also fell through in about 5 years' time because the government felt strong enough to let this fall. It wasn't very clear exactly how this game was played because, as most of you would know, many of these negotiations were secret negotiations. But it was clear that the Kurdish movement trusted this opening. They trusted the initiative from the government, and there was a real belief that peace could be achieved through negotiations. Now, if you ever lived in Turkey, you might know how important this is, but I'll give you my perspective. I had many students who were Kurdish, and they used to say to me, we were born into this conflict, we live in this conflict, and we don't believe that it will ever end. This, if you are a professor like me, would be a heavy stone that you would carry next to your heart. I mean, how would you work and teach in an environment when your students feel that there's no future? And I used to say, there's always hope. So today, one reason why I'm here is that I believe that there is a hope. And the hope is the hope that would come through political action and collective action. But going back to this heavy feeling, in 2012, many people were clear that things were not going in the right direction. But oppressive regimes create mechanisms of consent. And of course, by 2012, a lot of the media outlets were already under the control of AKP, under the control of the regime. Therefore, they were orchestrating media campaigns. And the Gülen organization. I don't want to call it a movement. It's once I call it a movement. My apologies to whoever has seen it. It's an organization. The Gülen organization was incredibly effective in pushing this message from various outlets, from TV, not named under one name. It's very important, named after many different names. So they look different, but they are under the same roof, and particularly through the newspaper Zaman. So this push from the media to support the regime really, really worked. And some of you who are interested in Putin, if you look back on what Putin has done in Russia, you will see extreme similarities between what Erdogan and his allies did and what Putin and his allies did in Russia. So in 2012, some academics started to raise their voice, and not in an organized, not in a formal style, because any formal activity would actually easily come under attack. That's one reason. And secondly, academics in Turkey have worked in an environment where they were not unionized. Most of them didn't know the importance of the union activity. So these were separate voices, but the message was coming through. So from 2012 to 2015, the number of voices increased. But 2012 was the turning point. If anybody has any idea about the recent history of Turkey, would know what I'm talking about. 2015 is the turning point, because HDP, which represents the Kurdish movement, as well as various socialist and anti-regime voices, gained sufficient votes to go over the threshold of 10%, but gained sufficient votes to topple the majority of AKP in the parliament. And that was something that the regime could not accept. So observers and people like me knew that they would not accept this. In other words, this was a regime after 13 years which established itself and was geared toward establishing a one-man dictatorship, would not go peacefully. Therefore, in the period between June the 7th, when AKP lost its majority, until 7th of November, when a new election was held, AKP ran a killing campaign in Turkey. This was a campaign that was very carefully orchestrated to introduce chaos into Turkey. That's exactly what Erdogan said or had said before. He said, if you don't give us the majority, there will be chaos in this country. And of course, he meant it. And what he did was introduce military action toward civil or civilians, as well as people who, particularly young people, who allied with PKK. But the killing was clearly orchestrated in such a way that would gain more votes. So the media supported it, cameras supported it, and the social media also was used to support this campaign. So by the time the new elections were called, it was clear that the killing in the country generated sufficient votes, particularly from the fascist movement, or MHP, as well as all sorts of hardliners, including some Kemalists, because these Kemalists basically grew up with the notion that a country had to be a unity, and anyone and everyone who was named as a divider, someone who appears to be dividing this country, is an enemy. So it's a very militaristic type of thinking. But they did this. And therefore, or they believed in this rather, therefore, by the 7th of November, AKP gained sufficient votes and regained its majority in the parliament. That led to what we have now in Turkey, a dictatorship. But in 2015, the killing and the oppression were so heavy and so disturbing that many people, such as myself, thought that something had to be done. But we are not the kind of people who would go and take up arms against the regime. Therefore, all we could do was to sign a peace petition. I signed it because I believed that Turkey deserved peace. I deserved peace. And the students I told you about, they also deserve peace. But I work for children and I work with children all the time. I think that if you are a baby who is born today in Turkey or any place in the world, you deserve peace. That's your right. So when we signed this petition, we thought that we had a fundamental right to peace. We have a fundamental right to demand peace from the government in Turkey. But we also believe that killing civilians or killing guerrillas were not a way to establish a solution to a given problem. And therefore, the text that I signed, I actually didn't even scrutinize. I didn't even think about whether one word or the other was more appropriate. The text as a whole was geared toward a very clear demand for this, and at the same time, a clear declaration of the crime that the regime was committing. And that's exactly why the regime came back to us with all of its oppressive, lethal force. And I don't mean that I was, or people like me were targeted by guns, but we were targeted by the mechanisms that they had, including YÖK, the Higher Education Council, which issued a clear statement that us, the Academics for Peace, should be dealt with. This was the exact phrase, deal with these people who signed this. So that in Turkish has a very clear meaning. If you are mafia, that also has a clear meaning. Deal with them means get rid of them. So that was done through YÖK. And in 1 week, for instance, at the university I was working at, this got started, investigation, internal investigation got started. I was removed from my chair position in February, and then they did everything that they wanted to do to the department because they were after money, and I was preventing them from doing things that they wanted to do. And therefore, they very quickly pulled new people into the department. It was clear that they were going to get rid of me. The timing was not clear. And in April, I kept on writing letters, or I shouldn't say letters, but messages. Why is this investigation not over? It's supposed to be over in 2 months. It's supposed to be over in 2 months. Therefore, instead of firing me in June, they fired me ahead of time, ahead of their schedule in April. And my journey toward unemployment and then exile started. I know I'm talking too much, so perhaps I should stop there. But that's the notion of where Academics for Peace come from. In other words, these people were not necessarily militant political organizers. Many of them responded to a killing machine, and they were genuinely interested in peace. So it wasn't a political move so that other political moves could follow. It was actually a cry for peace and a cry for the stopping of what we considered crimes against humanity. So today, many years after 2016, I still believe that it was a crime against humanity. The people who were killed or who were targeted were not my relatives, were not my students. I'm not born in Cizre. I'm not born in Kurdistan. However, I knew that this was wrong. So most of the people who were academics for peace felt this way. So it was a cry for freedom. It was a cry for help. It was a cry for peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serdar. Thank you also for having already introduced some important elements, for instance, the so-called depolitization also in the university, when you mentioned the fact that universities are de-unionized, for instance, they are not such a kind of unionism or even this political participation. So that's why also all of this movement actually started in a not necessarily political way, and it was afterwards politicized. So this is also an important element that for sure is there. But of course, also the reference to the militarization, and also it will be interesting to see maybe afterwards and later on in the conversation also how this militarization has also affected and or in, let's say, penetrated the university as well, or the way of organizing and controlling the university. We know, especially also with the YOC itself, that is also a kind of control, this higher education council. I will also now give the floor to Murat to perhaps continue this reasoning, and we will keep you back with these questions afterwards. Thank you, Murat.
Thank you.
I think you can, yeah, try to speak and see.
Yep. Okay.
If you cannot hear, just tell us.
So actually, Serdar answered.
Perfect.
Okay,
It's perfect.
okay. So actually, Serdar anticipated and answered all questions that me and Chiara tried to figure out and prepare before this meeting. But it's cool to hear. It's nice to hear. It's really useful to hear and see that entire scenery related to the past years of Turkey before 2015 and the period which arrived after 2015, because it's a really break-even time. It's very important for whom actually is interested about the Turkish internal politics, but it's always connected to the international dynamics also. Why is that important? Because in these years, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, all these years were not only important for people living inside the country, but it was that period was really important for all Middle East. So as people which take care about the international dynamics related to the politics and geopolitics, is clear that Turkey became a very, very important actor or tried to be an important actor in Middle East. And all these geopolitical international dynamics have influences also in internal policies of the government. In fact, in these years, we noticed that there have been also radical choices in terms of politics related to war in Turkey, and as political choices of the national government. For example, Turkish army decided after what happened, as stated Serdar, after having a military action on the national territory, decided to enter to Syria, and which is another country in terms of national security worries and problems. So that the period when Academics for Peace started to act and start to have a word in the peaceful period and in the opportunity of solving the Kurdish issue. Academics for Peace had a real important role. Also, I guess that we can define that role as an important role for peace in all Middle East. Because as I can imagine, as I can monitorize and study as journalist, internal dynamics of Turkey have been always related to the international dynamics related, connected to the Middle East political and geopolitical transformations. So what I want to ask now to Serdar is the perspective that universities are trying to assume in Turkey, if it's really only related and limited with the internal political issues of Turkey, or if it's related to the transformation of the Middle East in terms of war politics and missing peace discussions and possibilities.
Should I go?
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to answer exactly because it's a muddy scene. But the point that Murat has already made is, I think, clear in the sense that this regime grasped the fact that it can only hold on via militarism or via extraordinary conditions. And that's exactly what 2016, 15th of July, controlled coup did for them. It turned the country into a ground where you can argue that you not only have enemies outside, you not only have enemies within, namely the Kurdish movement, but you also have enemies within the regime, namely the Gülenists. Therefore, you are threatened from all sides, and it would be a very good idea to unleash whatever power you have to suppress them. Now, I don't use the word securitization very often. It's even hard to say, as you can see. However, turning this into this so-called security language is something that most of you would be very familiar with, a topic that can be dealt with through regular political processes, is turned into an existential threat, and then somebody says this existential threat is very important, so we have to take this drastic, unusual, extraordinary measure. And you see this on and on and on. For instance, the European Union migration policies are an example of this. The hordes, the dirty migrants are coming at us and in masses. Therefore, we have to stop them. So Frontex should do illegal activities, etc., etc. So this notion was something that was very, very important, and therefore Turkey as a country started to have a very strong military influence in the region. And given the new one-man regime, it's easier to do this. The entire regime, the entire state mechanism or the apparatus easily works and sends troops to Syria. And Erdogan is a skillful negotiator. To me, he is very much like a mafia boss who knows how to survive. He comes from that type of background. You may agree or disagree with this, but he is a street person, so to speak. Nothing wrong with the streets, but he knows how to deal with the bad side of the streets. So he negotiated with Putin, despite the fact that in the history of Turkey, there was only one occasion where a plane from Russia was shut down. It was shut down under this regime, and it was again a move to pull more votes from the fascists as well as Kemalists. If you can do such an extreme military action, that means you're a powerful person, etc. And the idea that Erdogan could negotiate his way into Syria through Putin worked. So Erdogan now uses the same thing, for instance, with Putin and the invasion of Ukraine. We are the kind of force you need who can negotiate. But it is really a force that feeds on vacuums. So now there is an incursion into Iraq. The troops, as well as the Air Force, are attacking targets in Iraq, and it's all fine. Behind it is a mechanism that feeds various small establishments that provide parts, that provide, for instance, drones to this force. So there's always a very clear economic activity behind this. So Turkey as a military force works very much like the United States as a military force. There is a very big economic cycle behind all of this. And this cycle then feeds into what's happening in the Middle East. The more unstable the Middle East is, the more grounds Erdogan would have for his dirty business. And my apologies, I'm not often very familiar with the so-called political science discourse. Not that I'm interested, but let me put it that way. Therefore, I do think that this is the kind of thing that Erdogan seeks. And the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the internal strife, which turned into an internal war in Syria, was very clear openings for the regime in Turkey. The more instability there is around Turkey, the more grounds Erdogan has for militarism. And that's exactly the kind of discourse and logic that's used all around the world. It's used in Europe, it's used by the United States, it is used by all sorts of places. Now with the invasion of Ukraine, you see this again. Oh, Sweden is threatened, so it should join NATO. Finland is threatened, oh, so why should it not be a part of NATO, etc., etc. So the idea that there is trouble next door is something that is playing into Erdogan's hands. And furthermore, if we look into the forces in the Middle East, these forces, you cannot put the label democratic in front of them. it is very hard to find democratic voices in the Middle East. Therefore, Erdogan has what you may consider natural allies. It's very difficult for people like me to understand how he finds one ally and then finds another ally which was an enemy 2 years ago, etc., etc. But to those who study power politics, this is perhaps not so interesting. But Erdogan keeps on finding allies. He keeps on finding people who he can work with. So he is, to me, no different from a Saudi king. He feeds on money, he feeds on injustice, and all of this now is propagated as the natural order of things. He is reis, as they call in Turkey. He is just like the street king who ended up as the ruler of Turkey, a new kind of sultan. So I'm not sure whether it helps your question.
No, no. You permitted me to make another to have another vision on the issue, because what the Turkish regime and its representative makes is something which is getting very common in all around the world. Actually, the quick exchange of the friendships and enemy ships is getting a huge and spread tradition, which is in terms of ethics is not okay and creates really huge problems. So it's really important and meaningful that in Turkey, in a very militarized society, in a country which is represented by a regime which launched military occupations in Middle East, it's very important in that situation that universities and academics groups try to launch a petition, a call, and try to attract the attention of the public opinion and inform the public opinion and the society that there is a possibility of changing the paradigm and making things another way, constructing the basis of the peaceful culture. So because of that, you were punished actually. In that Turkey, it's I guess that let's say sort of normal that you were punished. And then if it's okay also for Chiara, we can maybe start asking Serdar about what happened after the petition.
Yeah.
Because your life personally, Serdar's life, and all quite signers' life changed.
Let me introduce something before you go ahead, because it's I'm tired and rather sleep deprived, so I forgot one part of the question that Murat had. But I'll give an example from here. I'm familiar with Napoli. I'm familiar with a few places, including Macerata, because I stayed in Macerata for 3 months at the university. What I found was a number of academics who were quite disillusioned. But what struck me was the feeling of despair, because they felt that they were under a heavy pressure to publish and what I call collecting beans. They were forced to collect beans so that they can show these beans to their supervisors, to the higher authorities, etc., etc. And to put it bluntly, many of them didn't believe that the beans meant anything. So what Murat has just said is that universities have a public function. They have a function to serve the public interest. And here in this room, for instance, we are provided with a beautiful medium and environment where we can do all of this with public funding. And therefore, whatever we do in this room should also be in the public interest. So when I, for instance, signed the petition, I thought I was acting in public interest. In my daily work, I think about the public interest, despite the fact that many people, including Margaret Thatcher, for instance, argued that there was no public whatsoever. You only have individuals, there's no public. But to be honest, if universities are supposed to have a function of serving the public, then this bean counting regime in higher education is totally against it. It kills the notion of serving the public. Why should you go and try to change something in Torino when you know that it's not one of the beans that's going to be counted? So most of my work in Turkey, for instance, was geared toward doing things at the community level, doing things in schools. Most of this, my colleagues ignored. They thought that what I was doing had nothing to do with psychology, which is my original field. They thought my work was irrelevant. So to be very honest to you, most of what I do is neglected, to put it politely, by academics. It's not considered sociology, it's not considered psychology, it's not considered this, it's not considered that. What do I care? It is public interest. I'm serving children, I'm serving peace, so on and so forth. So the very notion that universities should serve peace is a wonderful notion. But every time you take this idea, somebody will very promptly say, there is no money in peace. For instance, there is no peace force that you can teach. But if you have a military, the military can send its members to this university where they take courses, and the military pays the university. So which one do you choose if you care about incoming money? If you're an administrator at the university, you would probably say, oh, it's nice to have a military force nearby. Okay. But for me, perhaps this is the place to insert this notion. Every academic in Italy is obliged to speak about nuclear warheads in Italy. Why is Italy a home to a nuclear force? The Cold War is over. Wake up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also for this keep on that issues, also elaborating on Murat questions. Murat start introducing also to move on, let's say, the post 2015. Before that, or perhaps also in doing that, I would also like to ask you more about not only this militarization that we know and we heard now, also how much is able to be also within the universities, and in how the university is also organized, and the scholars also organize themselves. But I would also perhaps asking you to refer this or to rely this into the so-called polarization of Turkish society. This is another word that, especially in political science, we heard a lot. We know there is this, for instance, Murat Somer pernicious polarizations articles with McCoy in 2018, and also the idea that there is this dichotomy in Turkey. There is this polarization of society, but we also know that polarization is also, of course, one of the technique of populists and somehow governments that try to reflect this elitist and to be against this elitist view. So the question is also for you is also to relate this with militarization of society itself. For instance, also in the terminology that is employed, these Karaman heroes and traitors, that also Jenny White has extensively, for instance, expressed the idea that there is this tension, also the notion of heroes in a religious way, the martyrs or the nations, and also how this polarize and keep on polarize the society, and what does this polarization mean? I mean, we know Italy is also a high polarized society in terms of politics, for instance, but what is the difference in the specificities of Turkey in this respect? It is also a way, and how this can reflect or has reflect also in your experience, also in how your this to introduce also what Murat was asking, how this also has then influenced your reaction and your colleagues, for instance, the reaction of your colleagues. This is also, I think, important to open up your also experience. How have you been perceived also by your colleagues? You know, as a brave scholar, or you know, or how was these tensions and this polarization also reflect to individuals? This is also for me interesting to ask, because we know this from the general society, but it's also in the individuals, I think, within the individuals. Thank you.
Okay, there is a counter right in front of me at the computer screen. So it is telling me I am talking too much.
No.
But this is how I am.
No,
So
no.
this question immediately takes me back to a book that I edited. The book has to do with martyrdom in Turkey. And martyrdom is a very important concept that was used over and over again in Turkey and to promote militarism. But it's also a concept that was used very, very systematically to promote the fascist movement in Turkey. The fascist movement had only one way to promote itself, as the savior of the country against the PKK, the Kurds, and martyrdom and the funerals. Every single soldier who was killed or a policeman who was killed was their hero. So it was such a fundamental aspect of pushing militarism. There wasn't a single political scientist in Turkey who wanted to write about this. And there wasn't a single scholar who published on martyrdom. So it was clearly a taboo that many academics knew was a minefield. Therefore, they avoided it. So that's exactly how my basically mentality works. If something is like a black hole, it is there, you can see it, it is very important, but nobody touches it, that means I should work on it. It's perhaps an idiotic way to do this because it destroys your career. It looks like you're pushing unrelated funny things, but the kinds of things that I do are all related because they have been systematically avoided, neglected, etc., etc. So when I wanted to start this book, I looked into the master's thesis and the doctoral thesis, and I found young scholars who, unlike the established academics, were asking questions about what happens to the mothers of the martyrs, guerrilla martyrs or soldier martyrs, etc. So I said, oh, this is the time to edit this book, and I basically ran with it. It took about 3 years of my time. I'm like a caterpillar. I move, but I move slowly. I'm a little undisciplined. This is a confession. But the book basically tells you the story in such a way that it actually can be used or could have been used to predict what Erdogan would do with this type of idea. Some of the campaigns that they ran after 2016 were actually foreshadowed by the stuff in the book, because it works in the same way. But let me give you a clear perspective so that I answer your question more clearly. They moved, the current regime moved to push all of this into daily life. after 2016. They used minarets for the first time in the history of Turkey, or the Republic of Turkey, to call people to action, to make people be alert about what was going on. But for instance, for an entire month, calls were made from the minarets about what happened on 15th of July. So perhaps you can do this for 2 days, okay? Let's say 3 days. But why do this for an entire month? And for people like me, who have no respect whatsoever for religion, this is unbelievable. But I wasn't there, I was already in exile. But it's unbelievable that they could do this. And they continued. When you look, there are many schools and streets named after people who were killed on the 15th of July. Some of these people who were killed, to be very honest, I mean, if you have a very large notion of heroes, okay, perhaps they can be included. But all they did was to do something that any other person could do, but they were very pro-regime, therefore they said no to a soldier, they said no to a couple of soldiers who were coming, etc., etc., so they got killed. So each and every one of them were turned into heroes after 2016. But if you look at the number of the names, then the way these are used, they are everywhere. And they were also used by the universities. Nowadays, public universities in Turkey are parrots, basically, or are governed by parrots. Every 15th of July, the parrots would give the same message. We had heroes, the country was safe thanks to them, etc., etc. So this notion was used in a very militaristic way, but at the same time endorsed by the religious establishment, which is under the Prime Minister's office. So religion in Turkey is basically ruled by the state, but it is not tied to a ministry. It is under the Prime Ministers. So it is a mechanism that the current regime really liked. It was designed to control religion, but it allowed religion to actually control the state too. At this point, that's the fact. Okay, so all of that basically turns into many different tools that are available to this regime to polarize the society. But some of you may already know Erdogan used polarization as a technique, as a strategy, again and again in his important meetings before he became the single man, the president, when there were elections, etc. For instance, he could pick Erkin Elvan, a 13-year-old who was targeted by the police and was hit in the head by a gas canister. He would make crowds boo his parents. And anyone who's familiar with who his parents are the marginals. His parents are leftists. His parents are from Taksim, etc., etc. So he basically makes an enemy from a child and turns it into a political tool. This is who Erdogan is. He is a ruthless dictator, nothing else. And therefore there can be no humanistic expectation from a person like this. And the older he gets, the worse he gets. Many people blame Putin, for instance, now, and they say Putin is a man who doesn't believe in public action, political, popular movements. he always says, who designed this? So Erdogan is just like that. He doesn't believe in public will, etc. He would say, who designed this? He really, really believes that Turkey is a top-down type of a place, and he is entitled to rule the ignorant masses. Now, coming to the question regarding my colleagues, the current regime in Turkey and the mentality that is penetrating the society focuses on one word, akıllı ol. Those of you who knows Turkish would understand what it means. In other words, it says, be smart. How do you mean? Be smart when you see the police. Don't question the police, because when he punches you, it's your fault. Don't question Erdogan, because when you get the hit, it's your fault. So this be smart idea has penetrated the academia as well. So my colleagues and the large majority of academics are playing the smart role. In other words, stay quiet, be under what they call, what is it?
Yes, comply.
Under the radar,
yeah.
under the radar. But if CHP comes to power, or if the Republican Party comes to power, then you will be again the nice social democrat, etc. So many of them see me as a non-smart person. In other words, an idiot who had the foolish notion that speaking up would make a difference. And I'm being very honest about this because authoritarian regimes create this mentality. Doesn't matter where it is, in Italy, in Germany, etc. You have to be smart, because speaking up, being autonomous, being independent, being a political agent is not what you are considered to do. So the notion of citizenship, the notion of the public, etc., all of these notions follow from the notion of a democratic, roughly democratic public. So if you have an authoritarian force, the popolo is only supposed to follow. It's supposed to be quiet. And one opportunity that exile gave me was to go to Egypt. And in Egypt, I observed what an authoritarian society does. And if you are good social scientist, you would know how an oppressed country Egypt is, and what injustice various authoritarian figures have done to this country. But it's very clear that in Egypt, there is an authoritarian silence that's deafening. I felt suffocated, so I left in 6 months, came to Macerata. But to be very honest, wherever you go, an authoritarian regime is against creativity, against life, and as far as I'm concerned, is against all babies who are born. If you are a baby, you don't want to be living in an authoritarian regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Serdar.
Another 20 minutes.
No. This was really, I mean, I really appreciate it, because it's I think the most difficult also part of this. You know, we could have a chance to hear about people in exile, or different view of oppression, but it's also interesting to have perspective from also individual point of view. And when you mentioned, for instance, this idea of be smart, of akıllı ol, or in the sense of, is also an idea that, to be somehow also individualistic and be somehow related and comfortable with itself, and also strategical somehow in individual view, individual let's say strategies that we could also choose in our lives. So thank you also for giving this more intimate perspective, but also on your colleagues and the university, the academy, I mean your fellows at the time, that how they also react, and they still react. I would have now a question related on this, but which is more on solidarity in that respect, which will open also the network of scholars at risk, but also the solidarity that you encountered. But if Murat, you have you would relate on this, or you can also Serdar develop more on this aspect, and what you know we reflected on Turkey, let's say. Polarization and how this led to a lack of solidarity in some respect, but let's also refer on the solidarity and also the solidarity that perhaps came from opposition in Turkey, if this was the case, and how the opposition has also, the political opposition, the civic opposition has also reacted afterwards. For instance, I remember because I follow it, although as a foreigner academic who signed the petition, of course, I had a completely different perspective. We were touched completely in a different way. But for instance, I remember all the opposition that also went to the tribunals, waiting for there is all this opposition that is following this legal opposition, let's say, that is following the process. And so I will also perhaps introduce these topics, and Murat, if you want to develop this also for another question related to it, would be nice to shift also on this issue.
Yeah, that's quite a positive part of all this terrible situation. As I can screen the Turkish society as a journalist, not as a scientist, what I saw in these last years that there is a huge civil society which tries to get organized and tries to construct the alternative. I guess the act that collective act that Serdar and other academics for peace did is one of the best demonstrations of this analyzed by. But meanwhile, when they were struggling with the legal processes, there has been also a big solidarity action launched by the lawyers, independent lawyers, which were organized. And exactly as Chiara mentioned, also a huge wave of solidarity was launched by the opposition parties, parliamentary-based or extra-parliamentary-based parties. And unfortunately, the regime answered in the same way, in an aggressive way, also against the lawyers. In fact, one of the lawyers of Serdar is currently in exile, and she cannot turn back to Turkey because she defended a professor who signed that petition. So even if we are in front of a really terrible and very negative scenario, we can observe really with happiness, let's say, that there's a huge and continuing solidarity action and demonstration in Turkey in the part of civil society. So this is maybe, in terms of your personal experience, this may be something that you can explain better than my introduction.
In terms of time, how are we doing so that people can ask questions?
Yes, we can, maybe we have time up until 12, so
okay.
we have
so
another
let's do,
15 minutes or
very
10,
quickly.
15 minutes for you. And I have just one question.
After we came under attack, when we came under attack as Academics for Peace for signing the petition, a group of lawyers started defending us. Then they were not very visible. They were not necessarily known. Most of them we didn't know by name, but they came together as a collective legal shield. And we were, for instance, invited each individually to go to the police headquarters to give our deposition. And this was because of an investigation that was launched, a criminal investigation launched against all of us. It's supposed to be done by the prosecutor, or it was supposed to be done by the prosecutor, but they wanted us to go to the police so that we would be afraid, we would be intimidated, etc. So the lawyers said, we will organize 5, 6, 10 people to go together, and all of you will be accompanied by a lawyer. So one of these lawyers, or sometimes two of these lawyers, accompanied people like me going into the police headquarters in groups and giving the same testimony or giving the same deposition. And the deposition was in the same words, so that we could joyfully tell the police, copy paste. I mean, I don't like the police, as you can guess. Okay. Going into the police headquarters was disgusting to me because I know that this is an oppressive force and so forth. But to be able to do this and to be able to see the faces of the police in the room, knowing that we were superior, being smart to be able to defend us, was very important. And I'm always very thankful to these lawyers. One of them is my own personal lawyer. And so this was a way to defend us. But defending people and showing solidarity, I think, is easier when you are under attack. Now, I don't mean this in the negative sense. When somebody is under attack and when you go to defend this person, you are actually endangering yourself. Therefore, it is an act of courage, it's an act of determination, etc. But it takes little in terms of strategy because you are in the defensive force. Somebody is attacking this side, that side, that's all sides, and you're in defense. I think solidarity is fundamentally important today during the neoliberal order or within the neoliberal order in daily actions and in daily lives. That's when I think solidarity actually matters more, but it is not so easy to carry out. So when I talk about solidarity in this sense, what I mean is unionizing, supporting the least secure labor force, going to a coffee shop and thinking about your coffee as well as what this person does in his or her daily life, showing solidarity to this person, whether or not this person receives a hello or receives sufficient payment. The other day I heard someone introducing a small anecdote. Somebody who is a laborer who works responded very politely to a customer, and he said, in this store we say buongiorno first. In other words, kalimera first. Very nice way to teach the customer. Say something first and then ask for something. But of course, you may not consider this solidarity. You may consider this a civil act, etc., or the civil manner. But what I mean is, we really need this, and I specifically use this because we need this within the academia. I don't believe that we can think of science as an individual effort. We cannot think of science as an individual enterprise. I mean, the neoliberal university forces you to act that way. Every single action you have to carry out is supposed to fit with a clear gain mentality. So if the two of us collaborate, each of us has to gain something. Why should I take this perspective? Perhaps I can do something just so that I promote your work, because your work about Diyanet, for instance, is very important. Okay, so that notion of solidarity is, I think, fundamental. But going back to Turkey, of course, we need this because, for instance, HDP is under attack every single day. So I need to display solidarity with them. I'm not outside of them, but I'm not a member. So I'm doing solidarity in different ways. So the other thing that we have to consider, I actually mentioned this already, but the class politics that are not necessarily talked so much really matter. Class politics basically tells you that solidarity is more common among the working people, among the working class, but working class in the old sense, blue collar. Among the white collar workforce, solidarity is not that common because they are in a kind of sector where people work in a competition way or in a competing way. Okay, so that notion is a very destructive notion. We need solidarity in every single place where people offer their labor force. Okay. And I think it cannot be emphasized enough, and I'm not telling this story that well, but among working people, this is very clear. Those people, I got fired several times in Turkey, 3.5 times to be specific. And those who offered me solidarity during this period, people from the working class, were more able to offer solidarity to me compared to white collar people. Because for white collar people, you know, the Effendi tradition, talking about money, talking about how you pay your rent is not considered sufficiently polite. Asking someone about his income or her income is not a very polite thing to do. That's the first question I ask if someone gets fired. How are you managing? Okay. So this notion, as you can tell, I come from a socialist perspective, telling you this, but it's fundamental. The neoliberal order would not be as destructive if we have solidarity within communities in daily life, within workplaces such as the university, because there is clearly resistance that's needed. So the notion of resistance, and I'm so glad that we're doing something today in the Museum of Resistance. Today, every single one of us who cares about justice has to resist the neoliberal order and hopefully do something to change it.
Thank you. Murat, we are approaching now the last point that we would like also to discuss with you, Serdar, and then see if there are some questions also from the audience. And this point I would like to make is also related to the solidarity, but mostly, let's say, also within the diaspora. I mean, from abroad. We talked a lot about Turkey, and of course how it's difficult to find solidarity and what kind of solidarity, whether it comes from political perspective, political opposition, civil society, or even colleagues and academic source. What about the diaspora? What about Turks that are abroad? We know that there is this let's say new some people, some scholars talk about these new waves of migration. Of course, it started after Gezi protests in 2013, but also this I mean, every day the statistics of the young people that wants to, of course, go out the country and arrives in perhaps in Europe, where there are already networks and contacts that are easy to attach to. So in this respect, I would like also to ask you about intra-diasporic relations and how perhaps also these polarizations and these differences are replicated in the diaspora, and also what kind of activities have been organized both by academics for peace abroad, but also afterwards in showing solidarity and trying to relate with people trying to escape, for instance, trying to find exile outside Turkey. I can imagine that this, considering the number of people, it's also different and can also create, for instance, such kind of competitions and tensions, because, you know, when there is a let's say a peaceful way, everyone is brother and sister, but of course when difficulties came and when there are less of fundings, and of course, and I mean the resources are limited, it's any kind of differences and tensions will emerge in that respect. So my question is really trying also to deconstruct this idealistic view of, you know, diasporic community abroad that help each others, and but also, of course, trying to see what kind of solidarity is also in place when it's time to react. So this will be my a kind of last point, and then Murat, you can also, of course, add some other elements that you also perhaps known in the first person. Thank you again.
Okay, this is the heavy one. Okay. There are different ways to respond to your question, as you might imagine, but let's put it as quickly as possible this way. The current regime in Turkey is using its extensions, for instance, the Diyanet extensions in Germany, in Belgium, in other places, as mechanisms to target dissidents, target people like me. And there's no reason why they should not, to be very honest, because it's a cruel regime. It does everything in a very nasty political style within Turkey. So why not do this in Germany? As some of you might know, people who live outside of Turkey have a right to vote. And therefore, this is also part of the calculations. Of course, this dictatorship is probably beyond calculating small numbers of votes, but it does try to polarize the communities. So the people who are teachers, who are sent by the government of Turkey, who the religious functionaries who are sent by the government of Turkey are selected carefully, and there are, as I can't know the numbers, a large number of secret service functionaries in various places like Germany, Belgium, Greece, and so on. So this is a regime that is destructive at home, domestically, and also abroad. So that really has to be considered. Many people, including big names like Can Dündar, etc., are under threat, but 3 women, some of you may know, who were targeted and killed in Paris, were killed by this regime, and they were targeted simply because they were key names in the Kurdish movement. Apparently, the real targets were untouchable, so they went to lower level targets, but they were killed by this regime. I'm telling you this so that we understand that this is no different from a mafia force that would do its killing any place you go. It could be Latin America, it could be Italy, any place. So the conditions are difficult, therefore, to organize in the diaspora. Academics in the diaspora don't know organizing very well. And I say this again from a neutral perspective. not in a pejorative style. And this is mainly because most of them, not all of them, most of them come from rather middle-class backgrounds. In Turkey, middle-class background often translates into not knowing about collective action, not knowing about working class politics, not understanding or grasping the importance of unions. Okay, and not knowing or understanding the importance of unions. Okay, didn't come from out of vacuum. It was promoted by particularly the military regime after 1980. Okay. So I come from one of those homes. My father, for instance, was a teacher, and therefore he was never in a union. Okay. My wife comes from a working class background, so she knows what a strike means. She knows not having food on the table because there's a strike. So, but having said that, there is an ongoing effort to be politically active and organized. But of course, this is countered by a very difficult challenge, which is to exist. If you are a young academic leaving Turkey and going into a place like Germany, it is very difficult to exist. German itself is a very difficult language. The competition within academia in Germany is fierce, it's very hierarchical, etc. And the only way to deal with this is, as far as I'm concerned, solidarity. But that is also difficult because people live in different cities, they work in different universities, etc. And most academics in Germany, for instance, don't really think that unions are critical to their lives and to their work. So these types of difficulties exist. And on top of all this, then you have, for instance, fellowships. There's a fellowship that is announced, and 5 people from Turkey, all living in exile, apply. And some of them have higher qualifications, some of them don't. This creates a tension. I'm not going to tell you about the details and some of the nasty details about this. I will tell you about my experience. When I applied for fellowships, I used this phrase in my application. If there are younger scholars from Turkey who have no other alternative, I would like to have them considered first, because I'm more senior and I'm more advantaged. And depending on the application and depending on the university, I offered other perspectives. So the notion that only the qualified or only the highly qualified should get the fellowship is not the kind of notion that should prevail. What should prevail is who needs it most. And I also think that this attitude should come with the notion that this person, whoever gets the fellowship, should contribute back. Just like a union, just like any kind of solidarity network, they should contribute. And that's by offering opportunities, offering work, contributing to peace, etc., etc. But it has been a thorn. And a group of academics from Turkey designed a scale or a kind of guidelines, so to speak, where somebody from, say, Paris or somebody from Torino can use as a checklist so that they can figure out who needs this fellowship most, depending on the kind of threat that they were facing. Meaning, was this person fired? Was this person listed on a government decree and permanently banned from public service? Has this person been out of work for a long time, etc.? And then on top of this, depending on the place where I was, I added the following. There were some people who were seeking positions, but they were from the police academy. No fellowship should ever go to a person from the police academy. There were people who were from the military. No fellowship should go to a military person, a person with a military background. In Brussels, they were receiving 40, 50 applications from NATO officers from Turkey. They were afraid to return, so they were looking for fellowships. I said, you haven't included this in your statements, in your criteria, you should include this. If this is designed to promote peace, you can never have people from the military, people from the police. Never. Okay. So you might actually think that, oh, but many people who were offering fellowships didn't think about this. And there was a time in Turkey when people could not travel, so fellowships were offered to people who could travel. And some people used this to their advantage because they were not really under threat and they had a passport. So we, within Academics for Peace, tried to organize in a way that was not disruptive, that didn't disturb or disrupt solidarity, but worked against this so that people who already had networks, often coming from elite backgrounds, etc., didn't go for fellowships easily. Yeah. And it has been a challenge. It has influenced my work in a negative way in some ways, but that's okay. You have to be ready when you speak about these types of nasty things. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Serdar. This is also very important when we, again, think to how to organize also this solidarity, because it's easy. We see now, when there is a need to help people, there is this emergency phase, or there is this very first phase, and then, of course, there is also a need to be more organized in spotting and understanding what kind of needs the people really have and what difference can be found. So I think we can stop here and take this last 5-10 minutes to comments. I would like to thank again very much, Serdar. It was very, very interesting for me to have your perspective, and also, you give me a lot of inputs also to reflect upon. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this almost online conversation. Thank you, Murat, as well. But yeah, if you also want to add something, otherwise we can open and see if there are comments. Thank you again.
My apologies for talking so much.
No.
No,
we are perfectly on time.
It was your space and your time, Serdar, and I'm really, really sorry that I cannot be there with you, but I really enjoy to follow the conference. And of course, I thank you very much for your speech. I thank you also, Chiara and Murat, for the very insightful questions that gave you the opportunity to talk at many levels from many different perspectives. And I believe that you touch many important issues. Of course, we cannot ask questions on all the several plans that you discuss with us, but I just want to briefly comment one of the stuff that you say is about university and the role of university. Of course, as academics, we are aware that our role is crucial, not just, of course, as a teacher, but I believe also we have this ambition to be intellectuals, and I believe that in this sense, the neoliberalization of the universities, as you mentioned also in your last answering the last question, is a process that affected a lot the role that we can have as intellectuals, because the bureaucratization of the universities and also the more demanding issue that we have to face too, somehow impede the role of dissemination and also pillar of the society that it was supposed we have as an academics. And of course the situation is different in Italy from the situation of course in Turkey, where as you very well explained, of course, there are mechanisms of repression and there is a regime. And of course, the situation is really different. But I also, we can say that there is a sort of transversal communality among universities everywhere, because this process affects universities also in so-called democratic system. And of course, we have to discuss a lot also about the democraticity of some regimes in in the European context and in Italy too, because of course we can discuss a lot this kind of stuff, and I discuss the very meanings of democracy with my students. But of course, this transformation of the universities tell us a lot in terms of cutting the solidarity networks, as you said before, but also in spreading a sort of knowledge that is not a knowledge produced for enhancing the civil society and society as a whole, but producing a knowledge that is important per se just in academic circle and not for the role that the university was supposed to have inside the society as a whole. So this is really a reflection that your speech inspired me, and I believe it's an important point in our societies that of course is more important maybe in authoritarian regimes where other mechanisms of repression are put in place, but also I believe in our so-called democracies where of course our role become more and more marginal and our voice is not so easy to be heard and to be considered also in public debates where some other expert took place and speak without having some competencies. And I believe this is another part of the story. And of course also your speech inspired me a lot of reflection about some similarities, for example, with the Lebanese case, that is the country that I studied for many years. And of course, when you say that young students and students in general are not confident with the future, with their own future, with their own role in the society. And I believe this is a very important part of the story, because we are responsible for the new generations. And if the new generations are not confident with the future and they didn't believe that the future will be carry out some good things and positions and peace, especially in this moment, I believe that we have failed as academics and also as citizens. So I believe these 2 points connected are crucial, and I really thanks for your speech. I don't have a particular question, but just a very short reflection and comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just quickly, years ago, almost 20 years ago, I thought that there should be a balance between what I do with respect to my research and my service to the community, the service to the public. And I decided at that time to devote, but to put it also in language that other people can relate to. So I said, I will devote 1/3 of my time to community service. And when I spoke with colleagues, when I spoke with my students, I said it this way. In our daily lives, I think most of us don't think about our time like this. And within the so-called neoliberal order, you are supposed to work all the time anyway. So you can never find out how much you're working. And during the pandemic, even in your home, your bathroom turned into a place where you work. Okay, so, and knowing how academics work, etc., we can also relate to this from that angle. So I think it would be a very nice idea for someone to do this type of calculation. Okay, let's be realistic. Most of my time should be devoted to survival, but why not devote 10% to a book that is not going to be counted as a bean, that's focused on solidarity in Italy, say, or just 10%, nothing else, devoted to what I consider community service in where I'm at, but just 10%, so that you can discipline yourself. Otherwise, this crazy cycle where you work, but you long for solidarity. You work, but you long for community. And I emphasize the notion of community because I know more about, for instance, Torino. I know more about certain places in Italy where this tradition of sticking to the community, sticking to traditions, being together, etc., still are important. So
yeah.
Stop there.
Thank you so much, Serdar. Thank you, Rosita, also for questions.
Yeah.
Comment. Murat, you want to add something?
Yeah, what I would like to say as a personal conclusion is that absolutely the university, the place where I do not make part of, but university is quite the ideal place to improve, create, and discuss the theories of the democratization of the society. Develop methods of participating in different mechanisms of the governmentship and also civil society constructions. And so it's important that there is there's a big space for the freedom of speech. And what I observed in Turkey in these last 40 years, that in every single occasion when people governing the country try to push the country towards the militarization of the society, as the first target selected the university. In the military regime of 80s, thousands of university professors were fired or decided to leave the university as protest. And now, even if these people are not governing Turkey, so we don't have a regime composed by military officials. Now the same experience, unfortunately, for one more time we saw increasing and taking part of the daily life in Turkey. So for this, I guess that it's very important that academics for peace experience should be explained and spread out around all world, and these kind of discussions where we have a direct testimony and the possibility of making it in a university is very precious and important, I guess. And for me, for one more time, as a person born and grew up both in Turkey and Italy, thank you very much, Serdar, for all you did and for all these explanations. And thank you for one more time to Chiara and Rosita for the experience and the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you again. All right.
Thank you both. Thank you both.
Good. So if there are no questions, I see also Daniel is disconnected there, and
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I really appreciate the the speech. Sorry, I put the camera. That's much better.
yeah.
I was there. No, just briefly, a short message to tell you that I found extremely interesting to consider academic for peace as a vantage point for let's say regimes. Political regimes. I mean, I'm interested in authoritarian regimes myself. I'm traveling on a regular basis in Turkey, although I'm not a specialist of Turkey at all. But and I'm living in France. And in France, we experienced recently, let's say, limitations of democracy in universities at Sciences Po, Grenoble, where I'm teaching. I mean, we faced something that should have ring a bell somehow. And I think the academic environment is a vantage point to highlight and remind us how precious freedom is and how important solidarity is. And thank you very much, I mean, for the for what you brought in the discussion. And well, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. I think we can call it a day and close for today. So thank you, Serdar. Yeah. Sorry, Rosita.
No, just stop the registration.
Oh, yes. Bravo.
We finish.
Interrompi.